Let's take a look at a system of chord voicings and organizing chords that I like to think of as a guide tone system. In this approach, we're going to divide the guitar into three distinct sections. The low two strings, the low E and A strings, strings 5 and 6, will be reserved for roots of chords or a walking bass line. The middle strings, the D and G strings, will be reserved for your chord voicings, the guide tones. And then the top two strings, the E, the high E and B strings, will be reserved for extensions, 9, 11s, and 13s, as well as melody notes, and then even solo lines. So this is kind of a pragmatic way of breaking up the string sets here. And what it does is it pairs everything down in terms of your chord voicings. The guide tones literally are the thirds and sevenths of a chord. If there's no seventh in the chord symbol, then you can use the sixth. So for example, if you have a major triad or a minor triad, then you can use the third or flat third with the sixth. So the idea here is that you're greatly reducing the number of chord voicings that you have to memorize. You're keeping everything very lean and austere, which is a desirable effect to have when you're playing solo guitar, but also if you're comping in a band situation. And then I think most importantly with the system is that you're not memorizing a bunch of random chord shapes that are relying on a physical memory, but rather you have an understanding of the function of the note in the chord. So let me illustrate what I mean by that. If we were to take a C major seventh, then we have basically three notes to start with. Our root, C, and then the guide tones of a major seventh chord are always going to be a major third and a major seventh. So in the key of C, that will be an E and a B. So if we use this approach, we're going to find a C on one of our two low strings. So let's start with the C on the 3rd fret, 5th string. We'll just call this a root 5 chord voicing because the root is on the 5th string, okay? Now, if we're going to keep our guide tones on the two middle strings, they're going to be right here in the vicinity, and it turns out that the E, the third, is right here above the C on the 2nd fret D string. And you can hear that. That's a major third interval. And then on the G string, we're going to place our 7th, which is a B. So if we play all three of those notes together, we have 1, 3, 7. It's a very nice sounding chord, and it will work great in comping situations in a band. Again, like if you're playing in a larger group, like with a piano player, or maybe even a big band where there's some horns playing some back lines. This is a way to really kind of stay out of everybody's way, but still outline the fundamental notes of the chord that you're playing on by using the guide tones. Even if you're playing in a quartet or a trio situation, using these guide tones can be very effective because you're leaving a lot of room for the improviser to stretch out on. You're not boxing the soloist into one particular sound because you're playing a really large chord voicing. And as we'll see in the next couple of lessons, these chord voicings are extremely effective to use in a fingerstyle jazz and solo guitar situation. But let's just take a look at the structure of each of these chords. Again, what's so important is that, in about 5 minutes, you can learn this chord voicing. And of course, they're movable. So if you want to play a D major 7, you just move it up to the D, up 2 frets, E flat, E, etc. But because there are only two notes, essentially, in addition to the root, then you can very easily and quickly recognize the function of the note. So, for example, you can see that the E is here, which is the third, and you can see that the 7th is up here. That way, if you wanted to move those notes around, you can do that and know what you're doing, as opposed to, again, relying on a physical fingering or a pattern that you learned. So, for example, if we wanted to change this to a major 6th chord, our guide tones would be 3 and 6. So you know which note is the third. A lot of times people will learn these big chord voicings, and you say, all right, well, where's the third? And they have to stop and really think about it. I don't know where it is. I have to figure it out. But by paring it down to a very small voicing, you can instantly recognize where the third is. Oh, there it is, because it's going to be one of two possibilities. So there's your third, and there's your 7th. So if I wanted to play 3 and 6, now you know, okay, there's my 7th. I need to go down a whole step to a 6th. And you'll be able to do this, on the fly in the middle of a song in real time. So to play a major 6, you'd have that. If we wanted to play a minor 6th chord, then okay, I have to flat the third. Which note in my voicing is the third? Oh, there it is. So I'm going to lower that by a half step. And now I have a minor third and a 6, which together create a minor 6th sound. So I think that you can do all of this in the course of an afternoon, even in 1 hour. You can get these basic, fingerings and this basic concept memorized. And then this is a great workhorse system. You'll be able to use this for the rest of your musical lives. It's very practical. There's basically two things going here. Number one is you have to know the formula of the chord. And realize that with this system using guide tones, we're eliminating the fifth. We're not going to use the fifth in the voicing unless later on it becomes altered, and then we'll treat that as an extension. For example, if it was a sharp 5, then we'll kind of treat that as an extension on one of the two top strings, the E or B strings. But for now, we'll just drop the fifth from the voicing and focus on the root, the third, and the seventh, and ultimately dropping the root, so just focus on the third and seventh or the third and sixth. So once you understand the basic chord formulas for the types of chords that we're dealing with, major seventh, minor seventh, and dominant seventh, then you can easily learn those and adjust the fingerings not according to a physical pattern, but according to your knowledge of the function of each note. So for example, if we started again at our C major 7, if we wanted to play dominant seventh, then we'd know the formula involves using a natural third with a flat 7. So we find the 7, and we lower it. And now we have our voicing for a C7. If we were going to play C minor 7, then we would know theoretically that that includes a flat third and a flat 7. So you find your third and you drop that. So now we have a 1, flat 3, and a flat 7. And everything can be expanded on from those concepts. So for example, if you had a minor major 7th chord, you'll have a flat C, a flat 3, and a major 7th, which will be right here under your fingers. So you can always start from a major 7th as kind of your default fingering. You've got 3, 7. So if you needed minor major 7th, you'd have a flat 3, and then keep the major 7th. Minor 7th, dominant 7th, a dominant 7 sus4, now you're going to replace the 3 with a 4th. So you ask yourself, okay, where's the third in the voicing? Oh, it's right there. I'll move it up a half step to 4, and now I have 1, 4, flat 7 for my voicing. That's pretty much all of the voicings that you'll encounter. Now, a couple of notes here. When you have a half diminished chord, also known as a minor 7th flat 5, the spelling of that is 1, flat 3, flat 5, and flat 7. That's why it's called a minor 7 with a flat 5. Well, if we're going to eliminate the fifth in the voicing, then we can use our minor 7th guide tone voicing for both a minor 7th chord and a minor 7 flat 5 chord. So it's pretty cool. You get a deal going on here. So if we saw the chord symbol C half diminished or C minor 7 flat 5, you just simply use the C minor 7 guide tone voicing. So you get a 2-for-1 deal on this one. Another voicing that will work with two different chord types is the voicing for a C minor 6, which would involve a flat 3 and a 6. That will also work for a C fully diminished 7 or any fully diminished 7th chord, because those guide tones would be a flat third and a double flat 7, and a double flat 7 is just a 6. So because we're getting rid of the fifth, we don't have to worry about it. So we can use this minor 6 chord voicing for diminished 7th chords as well. That's pretty much it. So then the next thing to explore would be the other possible inversion for these guide tone fingerings, which would be a root 6. So if we find our C on the 6th string, there it is up here, we're going to keep the guide tones on the two middle strings, the D and G. So what you'll notice is the guide tones just flip. They just invert. So here we had low to high, 1, 3, 7 on the G string. When we go to root 6, now the 7th is on the D string, and the third is on top on the G string, 7, 3. And we use the exact same way of thinking when we modify these chords. So now we have 1, 7, 3, major 7. If you want to make it dominant, then you lower the 7th. There it is. If we want to make it minor 7, then we lower the third and the 7th. So, and you'll recognize some of these shapes, and they're kind of embedded within these larger, minor 7 chord forms that you might be more accustomed to. By getting rid of those repeated notes, it really allows the chord to kind of bloom naturally. Because of that, it's kind of a paradox. But the more space you have in a chord, the more it allows your ears to hear. So we've just run through, as an exercise, you can run through all of the chord types that you have in your PDF handouts here. We have minor 7, minor 6, also diminished 7. You have dominant 7 sus4, major 6. So now we have low to high 1, 6, 3. Minor 6, 1, 6, flat 3, which is also the same voicing for a fully diminished 7. So maybe when you're practicing these shapes and learning them initially, just start off with one key, like for example C, and just work through all of the different shapes and do it very slowly so that you can see the shapes with your eyes, you can understand the function of each note in the chord as it relates to the root, and you'll also be able to feel, it's tactile as well, you'll be able to feel the shape. Oh, major 7th root 5 feels like that, minor 7 feels like that. And there's a couple of different ways you could finger it. But and then finally get used to hearing each of these differences. You'll be able to hear the difference between a flat 3 and a natural 3rd, a natural 7th and a flat 7th, so how each of the notes as they relate to the root have an impact on the sound. And then you could just spend a nice rainy afternoon working through and memorizing all of those shapes.